Okay, guys, here we go. This should be the last part. As the day wore along and the sun dropped to its bed in the northwest, the darkness had come back and the fall nights were 6 hours long. The young bulls retraced their steps more and more reluctantly to the aid of their beset leader. The coming down winter was harrying them onto the lower levels, and it seemed they could never shake off this tireless creature that held them back. Besides, it was not the life of the herd or of the young bulls that was threatened. The life of only one member was demanded, which was a remoter interest than their lives, and in the end they were content to pay the toll. As twilight fell, the old bull stood with lowered head, watching his mates. The cows he had known, the calves he had fathered, the bulls he had mastered, as they shambled on at a rapid pace through the fading light. He could not follow, for before his nose leaped the merciless, fanged terror that would not let him go. 300 weight more than half a ton he weighed. He had lived a long, strong life, full of fight and struggle, and at the end he faced death at the teeth of a creature whose head did not reach beyond his great knuckled knees. So think about that for a second. How heavy was this moose that Buck was able to take down? So 300 weight more than half a ton. So if a ton is 2,000 pounds, I want you to think about what half a ton would be, and then 300 more than that. See if you can post it in the comments if you figured that out. From then on, night and day, Buck never left his prey, never gave it a moment's rest, never permitted it to browse the leaves of trees or the shoots of young birch and willow, nor did he give the wounded bull opportunity to slake his burning thirst in the slender trickling streams they crossed. Often, and in desperation, he burst into long stretches of flight. At such time, Buck did not attempt to stay him, but loped easily at his heels, satisfied with the way the game was played, lying down when the moose stood still, attacking him fiercely when he strove to eat or drink. The great head drooped more and more under its tree of horns, and the shambling trot grew weaker and weaker. He took to standing for long periods, with nose to the ground and dejected ears dropped limply. And Buck found more time in which to get water for himself and in which to rest. At such moments, panting, with red, lolling tongue, and with eyes fixed upon the big bull, it appeared to Buck that a change was coming over the face of things. He could feel a new stir in the land. As the moose were coming into the land, other kinds of life were coming in. Forest and stream and air seemed palpitant with their presence. The news of it was borne in upon him, not by sight or sound or smell, but by some other and subtler sense. He heard nothing, saw nothing, yet knew that the land was somehow different, that through it strange things were afoot and ranging, and he resolved to investigate after he had finished the business in hand. At last, at the end of the 4th day, he pulled the great moose down. For a day and a night he remained by the kill, eating and sleeping, turn and turn about. Then, rested, refreshed, and strong, he turned his face toward camp and John Thornton. He broke into the long, easy lope and went on hour after hour, never at loss for the tangled way, headed straight home through strange country with a certitude of direction that put man and his magnetic needle to shame. That makes me think about birds migrating, and so how some animals have a chemical in their brain that helps them to know exactly which way to go, like an internal compass. As he held on, he became more and more conscious of the new stir in the land. There was life abroad in it different from the life which had been there throughout the summer. No longer was this fact borne upon him in some subtle, mysterious way. The birds talked of it, the squirrels chattered about it, the very breeze whispered of it. Several times he stopped and drew in the fresh morning air in great sniffs, reading a message which made him leap on with greater speed. He was oppressed with a sense of calamity happening, if it were not calamity already happened, and as he crossed the last watershed and dropped down into the valley toward camp, he proceeded with greater caution. So a calamity is something really bad that's happened. He has this sense of this. 3 miles away, he came upon a fresh trail that sent his neck hair rippling and bristling. It led straight toward camp and John Thornton. Buck hurried on swiftly and stealthily, every nerve straining and tense, alert to the multitudinous details which told a story, all but the end. His nose gave him varying description of the passage of the life on the heels of which he was traveling. He remarked the pregnant silence of the forest. The bird life had flitted. The squirrels were in hiding. Only one he saw, a sleek gray fellow flattened against a gray dead limb so that he seemed part of it, a woody excrescence upon the wood itself. As Buck slid along with the obscureness of a gliding shadow, his nose was jerked suddenly to the side as though a positive force had gripped and pulled it. He followed the new scent into a thicket and found Nig. He was lying on his side, dead where he had dragged himself, an arrow protruding, head and feathers, from either side of his body. 100 yards farther on, Buck came upon one of the sled dogs Thornton had bought in Dawson. This dog was thrashing about in a death struggle directly on the trail, and Buck passed around him without stopping. From the camp came the faint sound of many voices rising and falling in a sing-song chant. Bellying forward to the edge of the clearing, he found Hans, lying on his face, feathered with arrows like a porcupine. At the same instant, Buck peered out where the Spruce Bough Lodge had been and saw what made his hair leap straight up on his neck and shoulders. A gust of overpowering rage swept over him. He did not know that he growled, but he growled aloud with a terrible ferocity. For the last time in his life, he allowed passion to usurp cunning and reason, and it was because of his great love for John Thornton that he lost his head. The Yeehats were dancing around the wreckage of the Spruce Bough Lodge when they heard a fearful roaring and saw rushing upon them an animal the like of which they had never seen before. It was Buck, a live hurricane of fury, hurling himself upon them in a frenzy to destroy. He sprang at the foremost man. It was the chief of the Yeehats, ripping the throat wide open until the rent jugular spouted a fountain of blood. He did not pause to worry the victim, but ripped in passing, with the next bound tearing wide the throat of a second man. There was no withstanding him. He plunged about in their very midst, tearing, rendering, destroying in constant and terrific motion which defied the arrows they discharged at him. In fact, so inconceivably rapid were his moments, and so closely were the Indians tangled together, that they shot one another with the arrows, and one young hunter, hurling a spear at Buck in midair, drove it through the chest of another hunter with such force that the point broke through the skin of the back and stood out beyond. Then a panic seized the Yeehats, and they fled in terror to the woods, proclaiming as they fled the advent of the evil spirit. This is intense. This is like the scariest part of the book so far, but it does make me think back to that part earlier in the story where Buck had attacked other dogs and men, and they decided to let him live, remember, because he was such a strong, good dog. So there was some foreshadowing there about the intense power and wildness of Buck and what he was willing to do for John Thornton. And truly, Buck was the fiend incarnate, raging at their heels and dragging them down like deer as they raced through the trees. It was a fateful day for the Yeehats. They scattered far and wide over the country, and it was not till a week later that the last of the survivors gathered together in a lower valley and counted their losses. As for Buck, wearying of the pursuit, he returned to the desolated camp. He found Pete where he had been killed in his blankets in the first moments of surprise. Thornton's desperate struggle was fresh written on the earth, and Buck scented every detail of it down to the edge of a deep pool. By the edge, head and forefeet in the water, lay Skeet, faithful to the last. The pool itself, muddy and discolored from the sluice boxes, effectually hid what it contained, and it contained John Thornton. For Buck followed his trace into the water, from which no trace led away. All day, Buck brooded by the pool or roamed restlessly around the camp. Death, as a cessation of movement or as a passing out and away from the lives of the living, he knew, and he knew John Thornton was dead. It left a great void in him, somewhat akin to hunger, but a void which ached, and which food could not fill. At times, when he paused to contemplate the carcasses of the Yeehats, he forgot the pain of it, and at such times he was aware of a great pride in himself, a pride greater than any he had yet experienced. He had killed man, the noblest game of all, and he had killed in the face of the law of club and fang. He sniffed the bodies curiously. They had died so easily. It was harder to kill a husky dog than them. They were no match at all, were it not for their arrows and spears and clubs. Thenceforward, he would be unafraid of them, except when they bore in their hands their arrows, spears, and clubs. Night came on, and a full moon rose high over the trees into the sky, lighting the land till it lay bathed in ghostly day. And with the coming of the night, brooding in mourning by the pool, Buck came alive to a stirring of the new life in the forest, other than which the Yeehats had made. He stood up, listening and scenting. From far away drifted a faint, sharp yelp, followed by a chorus of similar sharp yelps. As the moments passed, the yelps grew closer and louder. Again, Buck knew them as things heard in that other world which persisted in his memory. He walked to the center of the open space and listened. It was the call, the many-noted call, sounding more luringly and compelling than ever before. And as never before, he was ready to obey. John Thornton was dead. The last tie was broken. Men and the claims of man no longer bound him. Hunting their living meat, as the Yeehats were hunting it, on the flanks of the migrating moose, the wolf pack had at last crossed over from the land of streams and timber and invaded Buck's Valley. Into the clearing, where the moonlight streamed, they poured in a silvery flood, and in the center of the clearing stood Buck, motionless as a statue, waiting their coming. They were awed, so still and large he stood, and a moment's pause fell, till the boldest one leaped straight for him. Like a flash, Buck struck, breaking the neck. Then he stood without movement as before, the stricken wolf rolling in agony behind him. 3 others tried it in sharp succession, and one after the other they drew back, streaming blood from slashed throats or shoulders. Okay, we have to do one more video, a few pages left, so I'll see you in part 4.